Hello, everyone. Bit by Bit is here again to talk about iPads. I am Ben Bajarin, joined by my esteemed colleague Carolina Milanesi, who was at the launch of the new iPads, iPad Air and iPad Pro in New York. There was a lot of discussion, some controversy, which I don't know if we'll get into because maybe we don't want to get some record thoughts on said controversy. It's over the ad, but maybe we won't. Maybe we won't get there. Um, all right, Let's talk about the products. And the more that you and I talked about this, the more I think there's some really interesting positioning points around these two. But let's just kind of give a high level. You were there. Maybe start with your take on how they told the story, and then obviously all inquirings want to know you touched them, you looked at this beautiful du- dual dual OLED, back to back OLEDs, whatever. So kind of just give us the rundown from the event, from your perspective.
Yeah, very different event just because of the size. It was interesting. I was seeing pictures coming from London where they had a similar event, and it seemed that the audience was much bigger just because they had people from Europe going to London for it. But very intimate, and we watched the video like everybody else did. But then we had the opportunity to not just see the hardware, but see some of the applications that Apple launched, where we saw AI coming into play in terms of taking part of the workload in Logic and also in Final Cut Pro and delivering a better result or a richer result, if you like. But the two things to me, and I wrote about this for Creative Strategies, of course, is the positioning of the iPad and where we are now, and then obviously we talk about AI. So starting with the iPad, if you watch the video and you listen to Apple, there was a lot of focus on creation, right? On one side, it was about creators, and on the other, it was about content consumption. I mean, this thing is a portable TV. Like the quality of the display is astounding. And if you couple that with how light the device is, you can see how somebody that wants a light computing device with the power that the M4 brings is going to be delighted with it. Obviously, it comes at a price, because that's where I get usually the pushback that people's like, it's a tablet and it's $2,000. And I say, well, the reality is not a tablet, right? It's not. If you want a tablet, then go and buy the iPad Air, which now has the larger form factor as well. But from a positioning perspective, the focus on creators to me makes a lot of sense now compared to the last iteration of the iPad Pro, because in between we've had Mac get much more visible and present in the enterprise than it's ever been before. And so the iPad doesn't necessarily have to be all things to all people, and we can double down on creators because of the ecosystem on the app side, because of the pencil and the keyboard, and then obviously the screen form factor and the resolution of the screen. So I think there's a lot to it that creators will love, and it's not just about overall productivity, where if you're not a mobile person first, which I am, and which is why I've been traveling with iPad Pro as my main device since forever, you will probably rotate and position yourself with a Mac instead of an iPad. So that was the difference in my view in the positioning.
So primarily, as you pointed out, creator focused, and that's the Pro. Do you get a sense that iPad Air has changed any? I mean, and I say this because we've had this long, sort of debate, right? Who is iPad for? In fact, in
Yeah.
in a couple of analysis I've seen, well, it's great for kids, it's great for the elderly, it's great for light computing, and none of those things are labels Apple would want to put on this product. I still think, and for whatever reason, we don't entirely know why it hasn't been adopted in this way, but I still think just your general mainstream consumer who's not using for work, who's, even though they could, who's not, a pro, this is a great consumer laptop. In fact, and if you think about it, right, Macs while they're good, we say they're consumers. From our research, we know the vast majority of people use those for work. So what do
Yep.
people who don't do, they do their email, they like the apps, they watch TV. Like iPad is great for that. There's hundreds and hundreds of millions of consumers every year who just use something that the iPad would be great for, but I just don't feel like they've ever made that leap. Because of that, it's been in these segmented niches. But I still think iPad Air fits that, but there was no real evidence, right, that that's their push or position.
No, it's true. They didn't really talk about it, and I think the reason is because they want it to be whatever people want it for, right? And so, to your point, for some people it might be for a kid. For some people, is a less complicated PC.
Yes.
For some people, it's just about consumption. But I do think that Apple going to the larger screen size for the Air signals what you're talking about. The fact that for a lot of people that do email, that might, browse the internet and do some gaming and watch some movies or read a book, that is an easy device to use and really engage with. So I think that and it was interesting that they mentioned that even with the Pro, the 12.9 inch is the most popular form factor that they sell. So I'm sure that we'll see the same in the iPad Air. And I mentioned in my writing, and that's again where people usually push back because they compare the price point and say, well, by the time you buy the pencil, you buy the keyboard, and you buy the iPad Air, you might as well buy a Mac, which is true, except
right.
if you want mobile, you don't have an option for the Mac other than tethering to your phone. And if you want touch on the screen, you don't have that on on the Mac. And so I think that between the usability, between the richer app ecosystem, which is still richer on iPad than it is on Mac, especially from a entertainment perspective, right? This is an easier step into computing for a lot of people.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's where at the high end, I think people get this misconception that it's going to replace the Mac, where if you're a creator and it's your job, you probably have both. If you think you need an iPad
Yes.
and you're gonna draw, you have both. I think where this gets real squishy and weird is in that for a normal everyday consumer who spends a lot of time in the browser, as we know, like for the average consumer, it's like 80% of compute time's in the browser. Handful of apps, probably less than 5 to 6, if most research still holds up to scrutiny. You could totally replace, right, your anything, your Mac and or your Windows device with this iPad. But we've gone away from that conversation of even trying to say, oh, it's a replacement, to it's kind of a companion. But I still feel like there's that opportunity with the Air that doesn't get pushed enough, and now it's got M2, right? So now it's got even more capable
Correct.
compute. It's perfect for that sub $800 entry point of computers, but nobody does that. They don't say, well, I'll buy a $600 Windows PC and do very little with it, or I'll buy a 600 and actually do a lot with it. It's there, but I feel like, and I don't know, maybe Apple has given up on trying to position it that way, but I still think that's a great role for it in a pure consumer viewpoint.
And I wonder if part of the story wasn't told in this week event because we didn't talk OS, right? And so I
Right.
think that we might have more of that as we get to WWDC and we
Right.
see the new version of DOS. Because when I think about AI and the role that AI plays, for me, when it comes to Apple, there's that role of making, especially for the iPad, something that I was looking forward to hearing was, okay, how does AI help me get around some of the UI and UX point of friction that you had? I mean, we know Federico and Matthew Cassinelli spent a lot of time with shortcuts for Siri to work on the iPad in the same rich way that they could do on the Mac. A normal user doesn't have that level of patience. So having something
Right.
from an AI perspective that allows me to either learn to work differently and not trying to fit the iPad into what I want out of a PC or a Mac, or making those steps easier, I think is where I'm hoping, we'll see AI and the new version of iPad OS come together.
Yes. Well, and okay, so that's a good point. Does the software change or evolve into this to the use case of more consumer-ish? But I also like that, if that's your viewpoint, right? You're a everyday consumer. You're not really changing a workflow. You're just doing what you do probably on your smartphone with more
Correct.
capabilities on a bigger screen. And I just, I
Yep.
still think that's just great positioning, but I know, I guess we'll see. Maybe at Dub Dub, right? We get a little more clarity.
Yeah, but so on the AI side, and I'm gonna ask you a question instead of me talking about it. The whole speculation leading into the event was the M4 on iPad was going to be all about AI. In reality, Apple positioned the M4 as the enabler of a form factor. So they were saying without the M4, the design that is so much thinner and that double OLED screen would not be possible. And we didn't really hear much about AI.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I think part of that's also a Dub Dub story, right? Apple they have to update their APIs and SDKs to ML Kit and maybe something more specific like an AI kit that just, gives a better set of tools to developers to optimize workflows. So that's important. I think, not to terribly geek out on this, but I do think it's relevant. The point of M4 where it gets really interesting is obviously Apple told, an NPU story for the first time. Thank the Lord they called it an NPU so that we can
well, they
comfortably.
didn't.
Well, they
They
didn't, but
said
they
other
did.
people call it.
Okay. No, they said the industry refers to it. So right now, what you're getting is Ben Bajarin is the industry who's referring to the NPU. I don't want to have to keep calling it something else. These are all NPUs. Let's just call them NPUs. I think this is my takeaway. Uh, Apple has given us the green light to call it an NPU on their behalf,
Okay.
even if they don't want to do it. So anyway, Apple Neural Engine NPU. So what's interesting is they made that point and used this meaningless metric called TOPS to just basically say they've increased their capabilities. When in reality, for Apple, it matters that all of their cores do good at AI. So you're going to want to run AI on some GPU stuff, maybe even some CPU, and obviously the NPU. Now, where this gets interesting is we believe through speculation on Reddit and GitHub, even some Geekbench results that Apple has moved to ARM v9 in their instruction set. And one of the things that comes with that is that it looks like they changed their instruction set from AMX, which was basically a legacy custom instruction set that they got when they bought PA Semi, and moved to SME, which stands for Scalable Metrics Extension. And this instruction set is actually loaded with AI acceleration in machine learning and matrix math. And that can come to every core. That doesn't just have to come to the NPU.
To
They
the
can
NPU.
increase, right? So their GPU can get better at matrix math. Their CPUs can get better with matrix operations. So essentially, that gets really, really interesting if you say this is now the new base for Max, right? It is. This is the new architecture going forward, and this architecture in its core, to be cheeky, is better at matrix multiplication and matrix math. And so a lot of the Geekbench results showed the highest performance gains on matrix operations, which is why everybody is sort of believing that this is the case. And I would believe as well that everything we're saying stands up to reason and is most likely the case. So I think this is just really a new foundation that they're building with this core, They mentioned a new CPU core. The last time they did that was on M2. They didn't mention it with M3. M3 got the new GPU core. This is probably a modified, but not necessarily new GPU core. And obviously the NPU is still an evolution of what they do with their 16 cores being matrix cores. So I view this as the foundation. Now hardware, so silicon foundation for all AI going forward. Now what we're waiting for is dub and APIs. Like, give developers the ability to harness this in ways that they haven't before. Because to be honest, when you look at ML Kit and you talk to developers, it's very, very clear that Apple has not truly unlocked the power of AI in their cores yet. And that's what we're waiting for. And I think that's what we hope for dub.
And I think that that's the other point that for me is very relevant as far as what people expect and where I think Apple wants to play when it comes to AI, right? The speculation coming into the event was it's all going to be about AI, and people were talking about, new and renewed Siri or whatever the case might be. But to me, it's clear that for Apple, it's about the silicon empowering the developers to bring AI to their hardware, right? And so it's almost as if Apple competes more with, Qualcomm and Intel, and then at a platform level, Microsoft on the PC side, to really make Apple, from an ecosystem perspective, the place where you want to develop and deliver AI, versus Apple competing with Copilot and Gemini and whatever is next, right? Because ultimately, from a business model perspective, Apple doesn't play in the cloud. And so why would they try and compete with Copilot or Gemini when they're dependent on somebody else's cloud and they're not driving business? Where they drive business is that integration of hardware, silicon, and software, and then the ecosystem that they build on top of it for the developers to take advantage of it all. And that's where both consumer and enterprise can take advantage of from a hardware perspective.
Agreed. That said, there was a little bit of a rumor, sorry to detract us from an iPad conversation, from our friend Mark Gurman, that Apple is indeed, I think he was trying to confirm a story from the Wall Street Journal, working on server chips and server infrastructure. Now, several years ago, I convinced myself this was a sure deal. Like, of course, you're vertical. Why would you not go vertical in the cloud? Then I convinced myself that was not going to happen because I don't see how Apple can, at their scale, do this without the help of a hyperscaler. And I don't know how a hyperscaler is going to just let them run their own hardware willy-nilly inside their infrastructure. Maybe you're Apple and you can, but anyway, that might be something, if it does happen, to your point, that solves a piece of that puzzle. But for right now, we're just assuming all of this is happening at the edge, and so therefore their architecture and silicon does matter from a design standpoint. So anyway, lots to continue to geek out from there. But let's talk about the shiny gadgets. You saw the shiny gadgets. You held the shiny gadgets. What were your thoughts? And say what you want about the Air. Obviously, everybody's super interested about this. I'm blanking on the name. XDR Pro Retina. Does memory
like that?
Something
Yes.
like that?
The tandem OLED.
Tandem OLED, TOLED. It's brand new. Never seen it before. So give us the spiel.
It was bright.
It was bright, blindingly bright. Like you were like, oh man, I gotta wear sunglasses.
No, because they actually showcased is interesting, and is the same picture that you see on the box of the actual iPad is a black screensaver wallpaper. So you see how that black is deep and bright at the same thing. It's not, like you're not gonna tan your face when you have that on, but it's definitely visible, the difference between that and the current iPad. But what just struck me was actually when I lifted it, like the thing it seems like a mock review. It's so much lighter than the current iPad. And I know there are people joking and saying, oh, is it going to bend like the iPhone? No, it won't bend. And I also had people saying, well, the Android side has had thin tablets for forever. True, very true. Not with that resolution. And I still remember it was a Sony tablet. I think I was still in the UK when they launched that. So talking about at least 12 years ago. That was so thin that did actually bend. So that's not the case. But the other part, two things that didn't get a lot of attention because in the whole scheme of things are maybe small, but if you're using it as your main device, I was not shy in sharing my dislike of the Magic Keyboard, the older version. And I love the design of the new version a lot. They streamlined it. It's thinner, the barrel that sustains basically the over the air, whatever floating part of the device is much nicer and slimmer. The trackpad is now metal, the same as everything else. And so it is just a nice experience. And the keys feel way closer to a Mac than they did before. And there's a function key, row, that they also added. I mean, it's fine. I wasn't one of the really, eager to have one, but it makes a difference from a workflow perspective. And the other thing was obviously the pencil that gets, and I'm sure that the Surface people are like, well, we've had that for a while, which is true. Basically, what Apple has done, there's a squeeze, new way where you squeeze and your palette comes up where you can select what you want to do. Obviously, with the Surface Pen, you have a button there that does the same thing. But the squeeze on something where you don't see a button feels quite nice, and then there's haptic feedback on when you're squeezing the pencil. I use it mostly to take notes, so I'm not an artist, but I can see how that makes a difference for people that actually use it for drawing, where it is technical drawing or artists. So I think the combination of all of that makes for a much richer experience.
So talk about the thinness. I saw people be like, look, Apple, why does it need to be so thin? You mentioned, I'm not really worried about a bend gate situation here like we saw with, what was it, the iPhone 6 or whatever? I can't remember.
Yeah.
Fine, but I am curious from the perspective of using it, what functional benefit, yes, it's lighter, other than being lighter, what functional benefit does that kind of give to you? Is it just portability or is there something else?
Personally, for me, it's just portability, especially when I believe that most people that buy the 12.9 inch have a keyboard attached to it because they are using it as more as a Mac than just a tablet. And so you are cutting down between the thinness of the device and the keyboard. You are cutting back on quite a bit of weight that you carry with you. And I think if you are watching content, you also tend to take it off that keyboard, right? If you're sitting on a sofa or in bed, you take it off and you hold it. And I think that allows you to, do that for longer. And I don't know, to be honest, I kind of hinted at the learnings that Apple can have on the M4 with the iPad before he ends up in the next version of Vision Pro. And I wonder if part of that is also that learning of, obviously the Vision Pro is not a piece of rectangle glass, but that thinness and the constraints that design is going to put on the silicon, and what that means when you're taking it into the design of the Vision Pro might be interesting for them.
Okay, so last question, part of the buzz was that this is one of the bigger, well, larger product refreshes in terms of breathing life back into iPad. We know iPad sales have been steady-ish, not necessarily declining, but let's just call them flat, right? The 200 plus million install base they have isn't necessarily growing, nor is it shrinking, but there's clearly hunger to update these. Do we think these products help change the arc really of iPads? Are going to breathe new life? Does much really change? Is it helpful that maybe there's clearer, like we started off in the beginning, segmentation about who this is for? Category wise, what's our prognosis on iPad?
Personally, I don't think that this is going to necessarily make the market bigger. I think it's going to drive more engagement. And I think that, even the people that had iPads, maybe they were wondering about the longevity of it and if it mattered or not to Apple. But I do think that a lot of the excitement should be coming from the OS side, just because we know that iPadOS is at the core of Vision OS. There's such a big now, interaction and connection between the two, that I feel that the iPad matters more because Vision Pro matters to Apple, right? So in that sense, until we see that piece in June, it's hard to understand if this is really making for a bigger market. But I do think that is making for better engagement.
Yeah, I agree. I actually think this will help. I think there's a lot of people who've been sitting there looking for, hey, I need a new iPad. Not a lot, much has changed. I think this helps. I would love to, like I said, see Apple really take on the sub $800 Windows computer market with iPad more aggressively. So we'll see. But I think it'll help. I think right now expectations are iPad sales should see a little bit of a rebound. So I think that's positive.
It'd be interesting to see if from a higher education, where the Mac usually has the bulk of sales, if we're going to see iPad Air coming in a little bit more with the larger form factor, so that, maybe you want something that has more portability, has a touch screen that the Mac still doesn't have. And that might be where we see a bit of an uptick in sales. And then, I also wonder, in the K to 12, obviously Apple has now decreased the price of the 10 generation iPad. I think the 9 is still available within the education channel. So from a price point perspective, they probably have the biggest breadth of, price that they've ever had before. And it'll be interesting to see from a Air perspective, like I said, if that is gonna not eat into the Mac in higher ed,
Right.
but add to the Mac.
Right. Interesting stuff. All right. Good times for iPad and iPad fans. I think it was a well needed and well hoped for product launch. So until next time, thanks for listening, everybody, and we will be back again soon with an episode on AI PCs in a few weeks. So stay tuned for that. Talk to you later. Bye.